And good evening and welcome to our very first show of Autism Journeys. I'm Anne-Marie Lewis and I'm joined with my co-host Sharon McCarthy.
Hi everybody.
And Sharon, I'm going to throw you right in at the deep end and I'm going to ask you, what is autism?
Anne-Marie, autism is a neurodevelopmental disability. It is a lifetime disability. It is something that once you're diagnosed with, you are diagnosed with it for life. It's a spectrum disorder, which means that the ability of individuals diagnosed with autism ranges from an IQ of under 70 with intellectual disability, non-verbal, they can be globally delayed, to absolute genius types with IQs of over 160, very articulate and very independent individuals. Autism can mean university, it can mean responsibility, it can mean working, marriage, all the regular things that people do. But equally, it can mean requiring full-time lifelong care. And it can actually mean everything in between. Autism typically affects 4 times more boys than girls, and currently the stats suggest that its occurrence is 1 in 68 children are being diagnosed.
Wow. And Sharon, what would be some of the main characteristics of autism?
Oh, there's a huge number of characteristics, I suppose.
So vast, maybe some key ones.
I suppose the most well-known ones are a lack of eye contact, or maybe perhaps an overstare, an inability to follow conversation properly. Individuals tend to monologue instead of engaging in the reciprocity of conversation. Children and adults can like very routine or repetitive behaviours, liking the sameness in daily routines, maybe using the same cup or plate, sitting in the same place, travelling the same route, etc. You can be looking at somebody that has a very specific or special interest to the point that they may seem obsessed with a particular toy or even in an inanimate object. They can appear very With
one of those cases, say, you'd hear about children, they've got like toy trains and they'd be like lining them up.
Absolutely,
exactly.
Definitely. Children with autism tend to be very focused on a particular object or a particular interest, and in those instances, children can play with toys in a very particular or non-specific way. They often use toys to play games that wouldn't routinely be seen when a child is playing. Children tend to look at toys in a very different way. They don't look at a toy car, for instance, as something that you drive with. They don't relate it to that larger object. They can, in fact, line it up. You might find a child with autism lies down, looks at a car in a very specific, from a different angle in a very specific way. Twisting the wheels with their fingers rather than driving them along. They like to line things up. It's very ordered, it's very routine. There is no change, there is no chance for things to go a different way to what they're expecting if things are lined up like that.
And that must be quite difficult for the parents, Sharon, because you'd ideally think they're just playing with toys and only perhaps an expert eye would be able to spot that.
I think a lot of the time, particularly for children that are very high functioning, it can be difficult to see. I think children that perhaps have a more classical diagnosis, that those behaviours can be seen more openly or more readily in that instant. I suppose another type of characteristic that people would often see would be tiptoe walking, where people tend to walk on their tiptoes, not intermittently, but the majority of the time. You can have parents speak about children losing previous acquired language skill, where they may have had 10, 15, 20, 100 words, and suddenly the child tends to lose the ability to use those words. Alternatively, on the flip side of that is that you can have people that would be considered almost little professors, where they speak so fluently and so articulately that people automatically assume that they're a genius. In fact, a lot of the time, those children that are speaking like that don't really understand the words that they're using, and they may be scripting, or they may be copying or mimicking words they've heard from in another context. Often people will identify children and adults with autism because they behave in a very specific physical manner. They present with a thing called stimming. Stimming would be a
what
way
would be
in which...
some examples of
Okay,
stimming?
I suppose a stim A child stims when they are trying to regulate themselves. You may see children flapping their arms. You may see them wringing their hands. You may see them spinning, jumping, deliberately banging into things, blinking repeatedly on multiple occasions throughout the day, chewing on inanimate objects, perhaps smelling random things, collecting very unimportant or seemingly irrelevant objects. They show absolutely excessive emotion when routines are changed as well. Stimming is a way in which the body regulates those sensory difficulties that a child is coming up against, and it helps them to regulate themselves and perhaps avoid feeling overloaded or feeling upset or feeling overwhelmed. Many times children with autism are diagnosed with a kind of a comorbid anxiety. 74% in fact of the general population at the moment have a general anxiety disorder, with as many as 90% of people assumed to have such anxieties. Often when a child or an adult is presenting with anxiety, they tend to focus more on those very rigid or routined behaviours, those lining up of toys, those external stims, those not wanting the change to their routine. They're wanting to be sameness right throughout the day in absolutely everything that they do. The other thing that I think is very important to mention, Anne-Marie, is that an awful lot of people with autism tend to have a meltdown. Now, people automatically assume that meltdowns children are kicking and slashing. They can be.
So obviously a supermarket scenario where we think it's just a bold child having a tantrum.
Exactly.
Could be a meltdown.
It could be a meltdown.
And how would you differentiate how would you know if you were the parent of an autistic child, the difference between a child having a meltdown or that it's just a tantrum?
I suppose a child with autism, there are 5 key differences. The first would be a child with autism will never look for external reactions or will never look for input from an outside person.
So they don't care the reaction of the parent?
They have absolutely no interest in their parents' reaction. They have no consideration for their own personal safety. There is no understanding of danger. A child will have absolutely no control over their behaviour. It isn't that they're kicking and slashing and intending to cause upset. It is in fact that they have absolutely no control over what is going on. They will not be able to communicate their needs. They will not be able to communicate why they are melting down as they are. And the other thing that I suppose is very important to note is that once a meltdown has abated, it isn't that the child has calmed down. The child can often be on very high alert or very, very close to another meltdown for many, many hours to come following that.
And Sharon, the 3 main areas of difficulty which all people with autism share are sometimes known as a triad of impairments. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I suppose the triad of impairment is an impairment in social communication, social imagination and social interaction. For a person to be diagnosed with autism, they have to have deficit in all 3 of those areas. Social communication in layman's terms would mean receptive or expressive speech. Receptive relates to how someone processes, understands and retains what's said, whilst expressive is our ability to express ourselves by talking. Either one or both of the areas can be affected for somebody that has a deficit in this area. An example of a receptive communication impairment would be being told perhaps to pull your socks up. In other words, to improve. We'd all know that. However, a person with autism may physically go and pull their socks up instead. This would be idiomatic speech.
Right.
And children with autism and adults with autism may
so it
not
goes straight
understand
over
that.
their head.
Exactly.
They take it literally.
They take it completely literally. Children with autism or adults would struggle with understanding jokes or sarcasm because they can be such literal thinkers.
And would that go for a case of what we do, we'd keep a straight face and then we'd say something the total opposite, that have difficulty in understanding that.
Absolutely. I suppose one of the key parts of communication is understanding gesture, is understanding facial expression, is understanding tone of voice, and children with autism or adults with autism find it hard to decipher facial expression. They definitely struggle to understand the tone of voice, and if you say something in a very cross voice to somebody, but smile on your face, you may find a child with autism will think that you're happy, and what you're saying is actually something that's making you feel happy. There are two other, I suppose, very key parts to communication. That would be that first of all, that as many as 20% of individuals with autism are non-verbal, which means that they do not have the capability to articulate what they need to say. They do not talk. They do not have language skills. They do not have words. Now, I think it's really important, though, that you don't assume that somebody that is non-verbal doesn't understand what is being said.
They probably have even a greater understanding, wouldn't they?
Oftentimes that is definitely the case, where you may assume that a child is not understanding. Just because a child is non-verbal, it doesn't mean that they don't hear.
And Sharon, if somebody's listening in and a few alarm bells are ringing, where do people go to get their child diagnosed?
I suppose in Ireland, what you do is you look at you go to your public health nurse, you go to your GP, you look at those developmental checks that children go to at 6, 9, 12 months, whatever the case may be. However, there is an act called the Disability Act in 2005 for all children under the age of 5 before the 1st of June 2007, or any child born since then. They are legally entitled to what is called an assessment of need. This is completed by the HSE, and to access this, a child's parent or legal guardian can refer him directly. They can either fill out a standard application form that they'll get from their local HSE office, or they can ring 1850 24 1850 to request one. Anne-Marie,
could you just give us that number again, Sharon, okay, in case someone needs to write that down?
It's 1850 24 1850. There is one other point that I think is definitely relevant to say with regards to communication, interaction and so on and so forth. There is a term called echolalia that people will hear when they are speaking about children with autism. Oftentimes children with echolalia, people panic because they think that their child may have autism. Echolalia is when somebody repeats something that they have said word for word, or there's a thing called delayed echolalia where they may repeat something hours after they've heard it.
So would this be harder to capture because you'd think that they were developing but they're only actually repeating? Exactly.
I think that as children grow, it is perfectly normal for people for children as they're developing to present with a certain level or amount of echolalia. It is as they move forward, it is once they move past the age 2 or 2.5 where you would expect them to have independent skills. Then it is then looking at whether or not they are still repeating back word for word. An example of that would be asking a child of 2 or 2.5, how are you? Appropriately they would say, I'm fine, how are you? But oftentimes you might have a child saying back, how are you? Again, word for word, not understanding the context that it is in fact.
But it's still an appropriate answer.
Exactly.
Okay. I'm going to finish off this first segment, Sharon, with the final question. How early can a child be diagnosed?
A child can be diagnosed as early as 2.5. However, a child can be diagnosed at any age, really. Diagnostic criteria that's available now allows for this, allows for diagnosis once the impairment can be retrospectively noted and once the difficulties were present before the age of 3. It is noted for those, particularly with high functioning autism or Asperger's, that it is only when they become overwhelmed because the social demands become too great, when they go to school, when they go to secondary school, indeed when they become adults and have to navigate the work situations and stuff. Sometimes they're only recognised then. But children, you can have diagnosis from the age of 2.5 right up to adulthood.
And would you say, Sharon, there's a case of, in this day and age, is actually adults that have gone through life undiagnosed?
Absolutely, Anne-Marie. Oftentimes people present with anxiety disorders, they present with difficulties socialising. They may be the person that you think is kind of odd, is antisocial, is whatever. They are absolutely wonderful, but they do need to No, they do need to perhaps look for more support. You have female adults with that have developed anorexia as a coping skill. You have male adults and female adults that may have depression, that may have social anxieties, and in fact, it is that they are undiagnosed with autism.
Excellent. Well, we're going to introduce a song now from Ed Sheeran called Photograph, and this is particularly poignant to our next guest, Nicole Duggan.
Loving can hurt. Loving can hurt sometimes, but it's the only thing that I know. When it gets hard, you know it can get hard sometimes. It is the only thing that makes us feel alive. Keep this love in a photograph. We made these memories for ourselves, where our eyes are never closing, our hearts are never broken, and time's forever frozen still. So you can keep me inside the pocket of your ripped jeans, holding me closer till our eyes meet, and you won't ever be alone. Wait for me to come home. Loving can heal. Loving can mend your soul. And it's the only thing that I know. I swear it will get easier. With every piece of you, and it's the only thing we take with us when we die. We keep this love in its photograph. We made these memories for ourselves, where our eyes are never closing, our hearts were never broken, time's forever frozen still. So you can keep me inside the pocket of your ripped jeans, holding me closer till our eyes meet. You won't ever be alone. And if you hurt me, that's okay, baby. Only words bleed inside these pages. You just hold me. I won't ever let you go. Wait for me to come home. 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 Oh, you can fit me inside the necklace you got when you were 16, next to your heartbeat where I should be. Keep it deep within your soul. And if you hurt me, well, that's okay, baby. Only words bleed inside these pages. You just hold me. I won't ever let you go. When I'm away, I will remember how you kissed me under the lamppost back on 6th Street, hearing you whisper through the phone. Wait for me to come.
Hi, Nicole. This is Sharon. How are you?
Hi Sharon, how are you?
Nicole, I'm delighted to have you on the show this evening.
So much for asking me. You're good.
I'm just going to let people know that your name is Nicole Duggan and your mom to Riley, I'm right, yeah?
Yeah.
And that you write a blog. Your blog is called My Boy Blue.
Yeah.
Great. Nicole, I'll tell you, I have a couple of questions for you. I'm just wondering, first of all, I suppose, the purpose for this show is just to raise awareness, as I'm sure you know yourself. So I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions about your personal autism journey with Riley.
No problem.
I suppose the first question I have is, before Riley was diagnosed, what, if any, knowledge did you have of autism?
Probably none, you'd say, being quite honest. I knew that autism existed, and I knew that, but I didn't know anything about it, really. I wouldn't have known anybody that would have been on the spectrum or anything like that. So my knowledge would have been very limited.
Okay. And do you have any idea as to, I suppose, did you note any specific behaviours or challenges that Riley was presenting with that perhaps led you down the autism road, or what process did you take?
He had, you see, with Riley, he was meeting milestones, but missing other milestones along the way. So he never clapped his hands, never waved bye-bye. He started saying words like normal baby words like baba, mama, up, out and all that, and then he lost all his words, so he went completely silent on us. We lost everything, and I think that was the major thing, his speech. So he lost absolutely everything, and then I brought him to the doctor, and the doctor said to me, "I'll give you 4 weeks to see if he gets anything back." Because he had been sick, so they were saying it can happen sometimes when kids are sick. And we got nothing back at all. So then we started down the route of referring him for assessment of need and early intervention and things like that. Okay,
and can I ask you, Nicole, you obviously, you accessed the assessment of need under the Disability Act for Riley's diagnosis. Did that process take you long? Was it within those 6 months, that 6 month requirement, or were you left waiting for much longer because of Riley's age?
Well, no, I was left waiting for a very long time. He was referred when he was 18 months. For it, and obviously they won't see a lot of kids until they're a bit older, so Riley wasn't actually diagnosed until he was 2 years and 9 months. And that was with a fight.
That was with a fight. Yeah. And tell me, what kind of early intervention access has he had, or what kind of therapies or supports has he received to date?
He's got nothing. We got an appointment for an occupational therapy, an appointment with the HSE out in the post. And we went to the appointment, and they said to me that they wouldn't work with him because he was diagnosed. So they actually sent us home, discharged him from the service, and then put him on another waiting list, which is the ASD waiting list, which he should have been on all along, but they messed up. So that's a 2-year wait now. He's got nothing at all. Everything we do is privately for him.
So you're obviously, at the moment, I've no doubt, I'm appalled, to be honest with you. I think every day I speak to people that have hours or years and years of waiting, and their children are falling through the cracks.
It's a disgrace, it really is. And it's the kids that they're letting down.
Well, it's the children that are losing out at the end of the day, and I know how vital early intervention is to the prognosis and to how well a child develops as
Definitely. And I've seen that with Riley, because he's been getting therapy privately since he was 18 months old, and the difference in him with that is enormous. If he wasn't getting it, he'd be a completely different child.
Yeah, but he's lucky, I suppose, to have a mom and an advocate like yourself in his corner. Yeah,
but then you think about, I always say, what about the kids whose parents can't afford to get it for them? That's where the HSE are letting families down,
Absolutely, I completely agree with you. Absolutely, completely agree with you. I hope to touch on that in future shows and see how people can navigate the system and navigate their legal rights and so on and so forth. Do you know? I suppose I have another question for you, Nicole. To date, we'd say, I know you're mentioning supports and services. Are there any other huge challenges that you've met? Is there any to date that it pops to mind?
I suppose the way people will treat him, they automatically will treat him differently because, he doesn't talk, he's non-verbal. He'll flap his hands, or he'll, when he's out and about, if he gets excited, so people will stare and people will make comments, and, he's at an age now where he doesn't actually understand it, I suppose, but, when he does get to an age where he understands that it's going to be terrible, you know.
Okay.
And you think it's just people just don't understand it, to be honest.
I actually think you're making a very good point. I think that people are completely unaware. People aren't educated, and people automatically assume when a child is melting down that they're being brazen or bold, when in fact they're sensorily overloaded, or they're just overwhelmed.
Where people have been like, oh, he's being bold today, and I'm like, no, he's not being bold at all, if you only knew, but it's just that they don't know about it.
Yeah, it's that lack of information, lack of knowledge, and therefore lack of understanding. Yeah. Can I ask you, Nicole, on a positive note, to date, what has been the greatest joy you've met on this autism journey?
I suppose just seeing him come on so much, only 2 or 3 weeks ago he said mama for the first time, and he's 3.5.
Oh, wow.
Which was huge. And now he doesn't say it all the time, but it'll come in and out. But that was major because all I want to do really is hear him speak,
Yeah.
So,
I think
a word back. He said mama when he was 9 months old, and we lost it.
Yeah.
So getting something like that back, it's huge just to see him coming on and see his little personality coming out, and it's brilliant. I actually have the goosebumps hearing you say that, because I know that I've spoken to lots of mums, and all they wish for is to hear their child's voice. Yeah, because it's very hard, and there's a lot of frustration, I suppose, with it, especially with Riley. He gets very frustrated if you can't understand him. And he knows exactly what he wants to say, he just can't get it out, which makes it even harder, I think,
Yeah, and tell me, Nicole, does Riley use PECS, or does he use that picture exchange communication system, or? We
started doing PECS with him, but he's very sensitive to touch and to textures, so the Velcro turned him off it completely.
Okay.
So he uses an app on his iPad now, which is literally PECS on his iPad. It just means he doesn't have to touch the cards.
Okay.
And it's fabulous. It's really good. He's getting really good at it, making choices and asking us for stuff. And he only started that in January.
Fabulous. So really obviously his frustration levels have alleviated a little bit. They've come down because he's got the capability of communicating to you in some way, shape or form now.
Exactly, yeah. And he started only in the last few weeks now doing a few signs as well. So it makes it a bit easier that he doesn't have to go and actually find the iPad to show us that he can sign it to us.
So they're love signs, are they?
They are, yeah.
Fabulous. And have you trained in that yourself, Nicole?
We've done a bit of it with our private speech therapist was doing it with us, and then he wasn't taking it at all because he's only started copying things in the last few weeks. So I was only saying now I'm going to go and do the full law of course now myself, because if it's something that will make his life easier, you'll do anything,
Yeah, exactly. And I suppose a knock-on effect then is it makes your life easier.
Exactly.
You're not dealing with as many meltdowns. You've a happier little boy who's more capable of engaging with you, and I suppose it allows you to feel less frustrated. You can see that his potential is being reached.
Yeah, and I think you'll do anything to communicate with him anyway. So if that's the way it's going to go for a while.
Yeah,
we'll use the two together,
Good. Nicole, I suppose most parents and people in the autism community would be aware of yourself, because you wrote a post on Riley being excluded and having a very challenging time and stuff, and it was seen as far as America. I believe that it was picked up.
Yeah, it went a bit crazy.
I heard that it went as far as Ellen Degeneres. Is that correct?
Yeah, Ellen Degeneres picked it up. ABC News in America, Fox News. A bit, it was crazy.
It's crazy, but you know what? I think I'm so impressed that one post from a young mum in Ireland here could have such a huge impact right across the globe.
I just never expected it to go that mental,
Yeah.
But it was good. It was fabulous because the amount of people that it reached was amazing. It really was.
I think it's fantastic. Can I ask you, based on that, has awareness for Riley and his diagnosis, has it created greater accepting and understanding of him specifically and his needs in your wider circle? Or
I think definitely it has. A lot of people, a lot of my friends, my close friends would have always accepted it, but people who wouldn't have seen us every day, or people who wouldn't have understood what was going on with Riley, have come back to me and said oh my God, we learned so much from it, and you know, I understand a little bit more now, and they're a lot more open to learning about it.
Yeah.
Which is really good, because it is hard when people don't understand, you know.
I agree, and I suppose as Riley gets bigger physically, I suppose some of the behaviours that our children with autism might they might present a little bit differently, and people suddenly don't look at this cute little child. They might see, do you know?
Exactly.
So it's fantastic.
And he's young still, he's only 3.5, but even now, in comparison to last year, it is a lot more obvious, you know.
And he's also grown.
Not talking.
No, he's quite a tall young man. I noted a picture of him in his new buggy recently.
Yeah, he's huge.
He's quite a tall young man. With regards to those kind of that kind of equipment, that kind of specialist equipment, Nicole, around those kind of specialist buggies for older children, iPads. Any kind of supportive equipment, really. Have you been able to access any of those things through public health nurses or GPs, or have you had to purchase everything independently?
Yeah, everything that Riley has, I've bought it for him myself. We actually went to the OT, the HSE OT, about the buggy, because the kids are actually entitled to them. But the way they do it is it's a priority system, and they said that autism would be down the list on priority. So he wouldn't get it off them. So I just bought it myself, because obviously we needed it, you know.
But you can't wait for 3 years if a child needs something right now.
Exactly, and he's so tall now that the normal buggy wasn't working for us. He was too heavy for it.
Yeah.
But with the buggies and stuff, they told me I could be waiting 2 to 3 years for it.
Okay.
Which obviously we couldn't do, because he was too tall for the regular buggies now, and to buy a buggy in the shop, they won't even sell me a new buggy for him, because he's too heavy for any of the buggies that they actually sell in Ireland. So we were at a dead end. I just had to buy it, you know.
Do you mind me asking, Nicole, I suppose, just to let other people know about the cost that you do incur, how much are those kind of more specific buggies to buy? Obviously you've got to buy them from specialist suppliers and stuff.
Our one came in we got the McLaren Elite, which is the special needs McLaren buggy.
Okay.
And I got it brought over from England, because Mothercare will actually get them here, but it takes 8 to 10 weeks for them to come in.
Okay.
So this came in 3 days, which is what I needed.
Okay.
But it cost for the buggy, they range from 300 to about 500.
Okay.
I paid $450 for his.
Okay, so it's a big cost.
Yeah, it's not like you're able to go in and buy a stroller inside in the shops, you know, that will cost under €100, because they don't make them that cheap. So
I know what you mean.
No choice but to pay it.
Yeah. Can I ask you one final question, Nicole?
Yeah.
With regards to being a mom, an autism mom, being a special needs mom, is there anything that you feel is important for parents starting on their journey to know? Something that you wish you had heard going back to when your journey began?
I think the main thing that I'd say to people is that if your child is going through an assessment and you know you're going to get a diagnosis and stuff, is just to know that they're still going to be the same little boy or little girl that you had before you get the piece of paper from the HSE or the private diagnosis or whatever, because a lot of the time people are worried that their child is going to change, but I know you get the piece of paper and you get the diagnosis, but your child is still going to be the same as what it was that morning when you walked in. And I think that kept me going a lot with Riley, knowing that he wasn't going to change and he was still going to be the same little boy that I knew, and that he might be different to other kids, but he's the way that I know him anyway, you know.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of parents, the worry going in, knowing that you're going to come out with a diagnosis, just to know that it's not going to change your child in your eyes is a major thing, you know.
Yeah. I suppose, Nicole, I have a saying that I often say to friends of mine, it's special kids for special mums and indeed dads.
Yeah, definitely.
And I do agree that I suppose the child stays the same, and in my opinion, if people should remain mindful of the fact that the journey will change. Your journey, your perceived journey may change, but your destination will always remain the same.
Exactly, yeah, and you can do it together. Do you know what I mean? Once you're with them, they're going to get there anyway. You know, that's
Perfect.
the way I always look at it. Like,
Nicole, thank you so much for agreeing to come on air. You've been
No
an
problem, and
absolute
thanks so
pleasure
much for
to
having
speak
me.
to. And I've no doubt we'll be touching base again. Nicole, thanks a million. I'll talk to you again. Take care.
thanks, Sharon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Now I'm just going to play a song, Simply Red, for your babies. This is a song that's especially important to our next guest, Elaine Healy, who we'll speak to after this.
You've got that look again, the one I hoped I had when I was a lad. Your face is just beaming, your smile got me boasting, my pulse roller coastering. Anyway, the four winds that blow, they're gonna send me sailing home to you, or I'll fly with the force of a rainbow. The dream of gold will be waiting in your eyes. You know I'd do most anything you want. Hey, I try to give you everything you need. I can see that it gets to you. I don't believe in many things, but in you I do. Her faith is amazing, the pain that she goes through, contained in the hope for you. Your whole world has changed. The years spent before seem more cloudy than blue. In many ways, your baby's controlling when you haven't laid down for days. For the poor, no time to be thinking, they're too busy finding ways. And I know I do most anything you want. Hey, I try to give you everything you need. I'll see that it gets to you. I don't believe in many things, but in you I do. Hey, you know I do most anything you want every day. I try to give you everything you need. We'll always be there for you. I don't believe in many things, but in you I don't believe in many things, but in you I don't believe in many things, but you I do.
And welcome back to Autism Journeys, and we're now joined with Elaine Healy, and myself and Sharon are delighted to have you on board, Elaine.
Hi, how are you?
Very good. And Elaine, we were actually looking for guests and we came across you, and you seem to be a solid pillar within the autism community.
I hope so.
And I know that you write a blog which is very, very popular.
Yeah, it's called Life Upside Down. It's just about my journey being an autism mum.
And you're an autism mum to 2 children. Do you want to tell us a little bit about Kirsty and Logan?
Yeah, so Kirsty is my daughter, she's 5, and Logan is my son, he's 3, and they were both diagnosed with autism before their second birthdays. So it's really kind of all we've known. It's just been kind of our whole life really, because looking back, I think we always kind of knew that Kirsty had it. She was diagnosed quite young, and then we kind of knew what to look out for with Logan. So it's just been our daily life now for the last 4 or 5 years.
And what made you think that Kirsty had autism?
Well, looking back at the time, because she was my first, when she was younger, I hadn't have much to relate to, but my nephew Shay was only 3 months older than her, and the contrast between them was very obvious. Like, he was doing a lot of things, hitting a lot of milestones that children do, and she would have been miles behind him. Like the talking, she wasn't talking when he was. There was no pointing, no kind of speech, no playing with other kids. They were just vastly different. When they were in the room together, you could see that there was something different about her. And when we went to the public health nurse for her checkup, they give you they have a list that they go through of the milestones that the kids should be reaching, and I knew that she wouldn't meet any of the criteria. She wasn't meeting any of the criteria. So the nurse then had said, I think we've something to be concerned about, but you're kind of in the back of your head, you kind of know, but you kind of almost don't want to admit it yourself, because it's just very hard to hear that word autism, even though you kind of have it in your head. But I knew she was different. She definitely wasn't like the other kids that I would have been used to.
And had you already suggested to your husband that you think she might be autistic before you got the diagnosis?
I didn't, but my mother, which was Kirsty's grandmother, had said to me when she was about 12 months, she's not looking at us, and she kind of doesn't have a relationship with anyone, only you and her dad. That was normal to us because we were just so used to her. But like I said, when it was just me, her dad, and me, Kirsty, it was normal. But then when there was other children around, you'd see the difference. And my mum said, like, Shay would look at her and he'd play with her, and I kind of said to my husband, I think there might be something, but I don't think either of us were prepared for the word autism.
And Sharon and I were only talking on the way down to the programme, actually. Sharon, you picked up on it, that grandparents are one of the primary carers these days.
Exactly. I think that grandparents tend to step in and do an awful lot of childminding these days, and I think that often parents, because they're at work, it is the grandparent that kind of spots things, that sees things. I suppose they've raised their own children, so they know what. They may not know much about autism, they may not know much about interaction and so on and so forth, but they will know what was appropriate development because they've raised their own family. Yeah, did you find that, Elaine, did you find that your small girl, that she continued to speak, or did she regress language-wise, or did she have very minimal?
We didn't have any speech. There was no regression at all. Like Kirsty now still doesn't talk. She's still what would be considered non-verbal, so we never had any speech at all. Okay.
And your little boy?
Yeah, he's the same. He's completely non-verbal now as well. Now we're working heavily with speech and language therapy with both of them. Kirsty now would be kind of very heavily prompted, so I could say mama, and she might say mama, or I could say tata, and she'll say it, but she'd never kind of come out and say it on her own.
Okay.
Everything is kind of prompted, like she's really heavily prompted. Now, just in the last kind of 5 or 6 months, when she's listening to Mickey Mouse Clubhouse songs, she's starting to kind of say a word at the right time, so we're so excited about that. Just to hear her say anything independently is really encouraging.
Fantastic.
But she's almost 6, like Logan is 4 in November, and he doesn't have any words at all, nothing at all.
Okay, and do either of them, Elaine, use PECS or Love or any of those other alternative communication?
Yeah, Kirsty has been using PECS since she was 3, since she joined school. She's using PECS as well, and she'd be a lot more established than he is. Like, she'd go to her book automatically and pick out whatever it is that she wants. We kind of still have to, like, he'll go to the book, but sometimes he'll just pick out the nearest picture, whereas she knows what she's looking for. She'll kind of rifle through the pages and find them, but they're both using.
Okay.
Really reduces the frustration when they can't talk. Like, you have some outlet that they can tell you what they want.
Yeah, I agree. And I suppose it's important to remember that Logan is much earlier on in his journey, so as he moves forward, he'll acquire those skills as well.
Yeah.
Do you know?
Well, it's been proven that PECS works. I mean, like up until maybe a year ago, she would PECS and wouldn't kind of say any words along with them, and now she kind of will. So I don't kind of worry as much about him. I think if we stick with the PECS, then it will definitely pay off with him as well. And he babbles a lot. She never babbled at all, and babbling is a really good sign. So hopefully the words will come.
Yeah, no, definitely. Fingers crossed. Can I ask you as well, Elaine, with regards to both children, did you acquire a diagnosis publicly or privately, or did you do one of each, or...?
Both of them were diagnosed privately. They were both diagnosed by Michael Fitzgerald, just because when we went about it with the public health nurse and the assessments of need, they tell you that the assessments of need will be done within 3 months, but I think it was about 8 or 9 months later, and they had both been diagnosed at that stage, that I even got a letter from the HSE acknowledging them. So we just couldn't wait. Basically, we just didn't want to wait. We didn't want to let the time slip by. And we're under the Governor St. Joseph's in Charleville, and they accepted his diagnosis, so we were able to access services straight away. So we went private with both of them.
Oh, that's good. That's very positive. That isn't perhaps what you'd hear in lots of circumstances, an awful lot of children.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. No, can I ask, did you go about diagnosis through the AON afterwards in the hope of accessing further public services, or did you just stick with the original diagnosis that you had acquired?
Well, St. Joseph's, like I said, took on the private diagnosis and took them into their services. Now, I know that they do their own kind of assessments as well, but they closed off the assessments of need once they heard that we had a private diagnosis.
Okay.
To be fair, we've gotten practically zero services from the HSE, honestly. Like, Logan has never seen an occupational therapist. I had to fight tooth and nail this year to get one up to his school. The HSE services just leave a lot to desire. Like, if you can afford to go private, it's really the only way forward, because the children just miss out.
And Elaine, you're only our second guest on the programme, and we've already been hearing this from Nicole Duggan, and I think we're going to be hearing it from most parents, how frustrating.
It's infuriating. It's absolutely infuriating to hear of all these wonderful, beautiful children, so full of potential, not being allowed to access or realise that potential because there is not enough funding, or there's not enough access to support. It's absolutely infuriating. It
is, and the heartbreaking thing is you're sitting in an office with your child that's barely 2, and they give you a diagnosis. They say this word about their life, and then you're just basically left there. They say early intervention, you need it now, and then you don't get anything. So you're just sitting at home, just watching the time go by, and that's why we went private. Like, I'm lucky that we can afford to go private speech and language therapy. If we couldn't, I would imagine that kind of would make you feel almost worse as a parent, that you can't do it for them. It should be there, like, it should be in place, but it's not. It's honestly not.
And Elaine, how did you feel? I read that you just got Kirsty diagnosed, and then you found out you were pregnant with Logan. So how was that period? It must have been really overwhelming uncertainty that what you went through.
Well, actually, I was 6 months pregnant on Logan when she was diagnosed, but we went through the whole kind of the process while I was pregnant. But by the time she was diagnosed in the end of July, I actually had Logan in November. Being honest, that whole pregnancy is like a blur to me. I don't know how I got through it, and that's being honest, because it was absolutely devastating. Like, in one way, you just want the time to stop so that you can deal with the child that you have, and then you have to mind yourself for the baby that's coming. It was really, really hard, honestly. No, it was very, very hard. It was heartbreaking.
And Elaine, why Sharon and I wanted you on the show is the whole purpose of us setting up this programme is to help people, to inform and educate and support with various guests on the programme. And that's exactly why you started your blog, wasn't it?
It was, because at that time, now that I remember the day that we left the public health nurse's office, and I remember the day that we left the country, and they had both said autism. There was nobody that could help me. Like, I looked up autism on the internet, which is probably one of the worst things you can do, because it's
so frightening. Go to Google.
And Dr. Google will just tell you all the worst things, and I couldn't get any comfort from anyone. I couldn't get any information about where we go next, even just down to the side of all the forms that you have to fill out, and did I want to go for the carers, the allowance, just all the things that come with autism. I couldn't get any help from anyone. Nobody could kind of tell me where to go from here and what to do. And once we got set and got kind of on our journey, then I thought, you know what, I'm going to set, I've always loved writing anyway, I just thought I'm going to set it up and I'm going to blog what we go through, and hopefully people out there that are sitting at home saying, God, that was us now too, because I felt for the longest time that we were totally on our own, that nobody understood what we were going through, and now I know that people do, because so many people contact me every day.
And do you think sometimes it's a case of people can't comfort you because they don't actually understand autism?
A lot of people don't understand autism. It's like, still to this day, like, a lot of people don't understand it. You know, children you don't mind because they're curious, but the way adults look at our children sometimes, like the way adults look at me if my child is upset, they don't understand what's going on with the child. You just automatically assume that they're being bold or that they're having a tantrum. And
which is what we touched on earlier, wasn't it, Sharon, in the meltdowns and the tantrums.
Exactly. And like, there's a huge, huge difference between a tantrum and a meltdown. Like, unless you've experienced a meltdown, you couldn't even imagine what it's like. It's just absolutely exhausting for the child and the parents. So any forum that I get to discuss about autism and to create awareness, I'll take it with both hands, which is really what the blog is, because even my Snapchat account is kind of constantly going, whereas the blog will be maybe once or twice a day, but I will Snapchat at 4 o'clock in the morning saying that we're in the middle of the night, we're awake, she's hyper, or he's awake again. I just want people to know what it's like so that they'll understand and they'll be more, maybe not even more sympathetic, but just carry on.
Yeah, I read one of your blogs the other day and you hadn't had any sleep. Kirsty had been awake for like 17 hours or...
This is the first night now since the 5th of July that she slept. Last night was the first night.
My God. And it must be very, very therapeutic for you to write, so you know that you're not on your own.
Yeah, I went to a counsellor after Logan was born, and Kirsty hadn't diagnosed. I think I held it all together when I was pregnant, and then as soon as he was born, I feel like I kind of unravelled. So I went to a counsellor, and he said to me that you couldn't be doing anything better for your head than writing. So that's where I get my therapy from, is the blog. It really does help. Like,
would you recommend, Elaine, counselling for parents of children with autism in general, as a way to kind of release those pent up emotion, that upset, that feeling of loss, or that grief, or whatever exactly someone might be going through?
It is a grieving process. It sounds dramatic when you're not in it, but when you're pregnant, you have all these plans for your child, and when they're diagnosed with autism, it's so devastating because all those plans go out the window. It's a whole new life that you can't prepare for because you have no idea what's going ahead. And there's so many developments in autism now that I even have no idea what my children are going to be like when they're older. But I have in my head the things that they'll probably never do. And going to a counsellor and being able to say those things that you can't even say to your husband, that you can say to a stranger, and not feel judged, and just get it out of your system and get it off your chest. I would recommend counselling very highly, absolutely.
Perfect. Can I ask you, Elaine, I'm going to deviate a little bit now because I know we're running out of time. Can I ask you, do you have any feelings on this new autism bill that people are petitioning to get enacted at the moment, particularly when you're speaking about your children's futures? Do you have any feeling on it? Do you find the language okay? Is there anything that you'd like to say about that?
I was reading up on it now earlier today, and it is a lot of flowery language. The only thing that kind of stood out to me, which I think they should be kind of focusing on, is that they wanted to create a campaign for the public to create awareness. I think that should be one of the first steps, because there's no point releasing a bill with all this big language that nobody, even the autism parents, don't understand. And like, you are worrying about your children's future. Like, all we get promises from the HSE that you'll get the services, but nothing has been kind of put in stone yet for anyone. And I think until there's more public awareness, there won't be pressure on the government to do anything about it. So
and they put out, don't they, that we've got 20,000 signatures, Sharon, but then you read more in depth.
I suppose my point on this whole autism bill, when I look at the language, I feel a little bit panicked. I'm looking at it and I'm thinking that this is going to be a piece of legislation that is going to be on the shelf for many, many years to come for any service provider, HSE, official, whomever to go to in order to meet the needs of our children with autism. But when I look at it, I was looking, for instance, at the section 3, the number 1A. As part of that, it states the words outlining how the needs of persons with autism spectrum disorders should be met. And I feel absolutely panicked when I see the word should, because should doesn't mean must, should doesn't mean has to, should doesn't mean it is the right of the person. if that makes sense. You're looking at it isn't strong enough. It's very wishy-washy. It's non-committal language that is being used. If you look at section 3(1)(b), you're looking as well at make provision for the wishes of the person with autism and their family to be taken into account of insofar as possible. Who decides what's possible, who decides where exactly it goes. I suppose I feel very concerned that the language isn't appropriate, that the language is very wishy-washy, that it is non-committal. When they talk about targets, you're looking at targets perhaps. It's targets being met. It's very much about resource rather than need. It's resource-based rather than needs-based.
And I think, Sharon, there's so much to be discussed on this. We'll have to touch back on this on the next show. And Elaine, before you came on, we played your tune, Simply Red, for your babies. And you just want to tell us why that song is so special for you.
Just the lyrics of it, like about when the children are born and everything that you go through to have them, like the labour and the pain. And I like it because it's from a dad's point of view. Like, my husband Brian has always loved that song, and today we were discussing what song we pick, and he just said it would have to be the Simply Red one. I'd agree with him. We both love that song, and just the lyrics that you do most anything that they need and make sure that they get what they need, and that's what we're doing for them. So
fantastic, Elaine. And Elaine, this is the first and not the last time. We'll definitely have you back on the show. And next week we've got Evelyn McKeown, the mother of
the
identical triplets. So we're looking forward to having her on. And we've also got Matt Daly, whose song he wrote, Your World, went straight to number 1 in the Scottish new music charts. So again, a massive thank you to our guests, Elaine Healy and Nicole Duggan. And goodbye from myself, Anne-Marie. And
Sharon, thanks for tuning in, and we'll speak again next week.
Thank you.